All right, folks, up for our next panel, we have Path, Dzogchen Pedagogies. We have Justin Kelley up first, then Nathaniel Rich, then Michael Sheehy. So we're looking forward to this panel.
Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here, as many have mentioned. A couple of thank yous. I want to thank Learned, old friend and colleague. We studied here together, and Dr. Foote, I should say. Thank you so much for all the work you're doing, all the student organizers. I know what happens behind the scenes. And to my wonderful advisor, Dr. Ann Klein, Lama Riggs and Droma, someone I've grown to respect and admire over the years through both the joys and challenges. So thanks for putting up with me. It's my first time back since I finished my PhD, so it's really special that this is the occasion. So I'm going to talk a little about a slightly different topic, or maybe a different perspective, but nonetheless about Dzogchen. There'll be a few excerpts that I've cited in the presentation. Just so you know, systems will refer to the Drumtadzu of Longchenpa, one of his 7 treasuries, and then expanse will refer to the Chöngzi, so just so you're oriented. I also include the page numbers that accord to Richard Barron's translations. He's a great inspiration, and I include them out of respect. My talk's going to be structured in 3 sections. The first section treats major themes, a couple major themes in what's called transformative learning theory. And then I dive into some elements of Longchenpa's presentation, specifically around space and effortlessness. And then I end with a short comparison, providing some perspective paths forward as to how these 2 approaches could function in unison. So this paper is part of a larger project that looks at historical Tibetan treatises and manuals with an eye towards developing new Buddhist-inspired pedagogies. I believe these pedagogies could help people better understand our human predicament and more productively face our ever-changing and increasingly uncertain world. Moreover, these pedagogies embrace contemporary approaches to learning while recognizing that these systems often overlook some fundamental elements of human experience. So, transformative learning theory. This is a contemporary pedagogy pioneered by Jacques Mezereau. Transformative learning theory promotes forms of learning that are not restricted to understanding new knowledge and developing new skills. It aims instead toward a fundamental restructuring of how we understand ourselves in the world. This restructuring occurs introspectively and then through reflection to who we are and how we experience the world. At the heart of this presentation is a term coined by Jacques Mezereau, perspective transformation. And perspective transformation is a process of becoming critically aware of how and why our assumptions have come to constrain the ways we perceive, understand, and feel about the world, changing these structures of habitual expectation to make possible a more inclusive and discriminating and integrative perspective, and finally making choices or otherwise acting upon these new understandings. So first, I'd like to unpack 3 terms that Jacques Mezereau uses here: inclusive, discriminating, and integrating. Here, inclusive signals the student's ability to see perspectives on or data about a situation, breaking free from their previous mode of understanding. An example would be my 6-year-old son, who some of you have met, recently realizing that the capacity and weight of batteries is directly correlated, making engineering electric planes challenging. Discriminating here refers to one's ability to decipher the validity or usefulness of information. So an example would be experiencing our news feeds. However unfortunate, we constantly are discriminating between what is and what is not relevant to us. And then finally, the idea of integrating here refers to our ability to coalesce diverse information or perspectives into a single cogent view. An example would be a new undergrad engineering student taking an elective in Buddhist studies. They oftentimes come in with a definition of religion that's predicated on a creator, and they learn that it's no longer viable in this context. So the process of restructuring one's understanding of themselves in the world are most often precipitated by what Mezereau describes as disorienting dilemmas. These moments are ones that challenge the status quo. A disorienting dilemma may arise due to a discovery, such as a cancer diagnosis, or witnessing something unexplainable, such as a feat of superhuman strength in face of crisis, or perhaps a breakthrough. A person in psychotherapy gains perspective concerning their inner psychological world. Regardless of what precipitates a disorienting dilemma, a challenge of the status quo unfolds. It is a questioning of some belief of what is possible for ourselves or true in the world. Moreover, these moments can result in a restructuring of our cognitive apparatus, or what Mezirow calls our perspective. Much of transformative learning theory literature focuses on describing methods for educators to help their students cultivate these experiences. These techniques are extremely diverse, and I mentioned a few highlights here. So to begin, critical reflection. So inviting students to reflect on their assumptions, beliefs, views, so on and so forth, to reimagine these in face of new data. Experiential learning exercises. So oftentimes in classrooms, we'll role play or create problem-solving activities, simulate some type of real-world situation in which a student can get a new taste of an experience or way of being. Discourse. So creating safe spaces for groups to engage in dialogue, authentic, heartfelt dialogue in service of challenging each other's assumptions, beliefs, views, etc. And then finally, critical forms of pedagogy. So creating safe situations and safe spaces to challenge structures and hopefully inspire some social resistance. So on to Longchenpa. In many cases, these techniques are analogous or even homologous with practices in Buddhist traditions. So just a couple examples. Many forms of analytical meditation resemble the critical reflection as described above. They invite the practitioner to reflect on and apply new information to their understanding of themselves and the world. Additionally, experiential learning exercises can be analogous at times with traditional Tibetan debate. For example, in debate, a practitioner often assumes a particular philosophical stance, even if it's not their own, in service of better understanding it and perhaps eventually learning how to refute it. So there's many fruitful points of comparison we could dive into, and I'm going to focus on perhaps a less obvious one, and that's the spacious and effortless approach of Longchenpa's Dzogchen. So in particular, I consider two interrelated ideas within the writings of Longchenpa: space and effortlessness. These two ideas form critical building blocks upon which Longchenpa describes the transformative system of Dzogchen. In particular, space is used to elucidate core topics that are employed to define the ultimate transcendent state of mind. These terms include mind nature, semni, fundamental expanse, ying, and awareness, rigpa. The trope of space and these associated terms are employed to expand the practitioner's perspective beyond the individual subject and instead embrace a vast, interconnected sense of humanness or beingness that transcends the individual. Based on these spacious definitions, Longchenpa then advocates for the practitioner to assume an effortless way of being that allows her to better access these transformative and eventually transcendent states of mind. As will be described later in Mezirow's terminology, these Buddhist states are analogous with many attributes of disorienting dilemmas during which the individual's understanding of themselves and their world are radically altered. So the first theme, space. Longchenpa's reliance on the trope of space is not unique to him, as space is a defining component of Dzogchen from its inception. What appears to be novel, however, is the diversity of attributes articulated in and through the lens of space. In my analysis here, I explore two interrelated semantic attributes of space: stainlessness, or trimamepa, and uncompoundedness, dumache. I also explore an embodied and enacted mind state associated with space, or what I refer to as perspectival space. This latter phrase has no single correlate in Tibetan. What I'm trying to communicate with it, however, is that it's an experience of merging and or dissolving boundaries between external world and internal experiencer. So stainlessness. Across vehicles within Tibetan Buddhism, the presence or absence of stains within the mind is a rubric through which one's progression on the path is often measured. Stains are synonymous with obscurations of mind or afflicted emotions. In their simplest presentation, they're often categorized as greed, hatred, and delusion. These are described as stains insofar as they appear to stain or obscure one's mind. In the sutra vehicles, the practitioner engages in various practices in service of uprooting these stains. Whereas in the tantric vehicles, the emphasis is placed on either transforming the stains into something beneficial, a la the archetypal peacock transforming poison into medicine, or recognizing their true nature. The underlying view of stains in these approaches is described by Longchenpa here. The self-purified fundamental expanse is ultimate truth, arising as primordial wisdom. When it possesses stains, it's called spiritual potential, or basic disposition, heart of the thus gone. At the moment of being free from stains, it's called awakening, or thus gone. Within the context of Dzogchen, on the other hand, the view of stains is quite different. Here, stains and defilements are themselves primordial wisdom, or yeshe. There's no interpretive step of recognizing primordial wisdom through the stains. The stains are, in fact, primordial wisdom. This understanding of stainlessness signifies the primordial purity of space. Space is envisioned as a ubiquitous, all-pervasive reality that's unstainable. Moreover, space is used to describe awareness and is in turn the mind state that the practitioner aims to rest within, or perhaps at times unify themselves with. This state is free from identification from anything, from experience as an individual subject, person, or phenomena. Uncompoundedness. For Longchenpa, compounded is understood as that which is born from causes and conditions. Compounded phenomena are aggregations of causes and conditions. The characteristic of being compounded defines the all-obscuring truth, or Kunzok-denpa. Alternatively, Longchenpa describes ultimate truth, Dundam-denpa, as uncompounded. For example, in his presentation of the Vaibhashika system, philosophical system, Longchenpa explains that uncompoundedness of some phenomena and experiences constitutes the perspective of ultimate truth. In this way, uncompounded is a descriptor. In Dzogchen, however, Longchenpa's emphasis in regards to uncompoundedness shifts from the descriptive register, i.e. describing objects and states of mind, to the epistemological register, i.e. experiencing these objects, states of mind. Understanding this unique presentation of uncompoundedness in Dzogchen is aided by looking at terms with which it's associated. One example being suchness, chuni, dharmata. Simply put, suchness is used to describe a basic reality of experience and or ultimate truth. Suchness is uncompounded as it does not depend or rely on anything else. It does not arise based on causes and conditions. Reality just is. So perspectival space. The third element of Longchenpa's treatment of space that I want to touch on here is perspectival space. This speaks to an emergent experience in which one no longer distinguishes between separate inner subject and outer objects. A blurring of the divide between subject and object occurs. This blurring is often experienced as a merging between internal knower and external object, and it results in a restructuring of one's experience of reality. Quote here, having realized that external objects do not exist, when ungraspable suchness is understood to be pure like space, you ascertain that the internal apprehender is groundless and without support. Here, Longchenpa discusses the dynamics between the experience of external objects, chiyo, and internal apprehender, nangzimpa, that registers, perceives, or experiences these objects. He explains that there's a relationship between the non-existence of the external object and the groundlessness of the internal apprehender. Here, groundlessness refers to the lack of any true existence, truly existent apprehender. Longchenpa explains that the relationship between object and apprehender shifts in and through the purification of one's understanding of suchness, which is said to be pure like space. This shift then results in a new understanding of the internal subject. It's important to also note that the opposite is true. Through seeing the nature of the apprehender, one understands the nature of external objects. So effort, or effortlessness. In order to access this spacious frame of mind that Longchenpa is describing, he encourages the individual to reimagine how they relate to experience. Instead of exerting solwa, striving, betba, and persevering, tsundru, to accomplish one thing and abandon something else, Longchenpa advocates for the individual to go beyond delineations of all kind and embody a state of effortless engagement that simply rests in their innate nature. So said here, the great completeness, or Dzogchen, is the expanse of the Vajra heart, which is luminosity, self-purified and beyond establishing and clearing away. Due to being beyond any effortful striving, it is the expanse of innate nature. Due to its natural face being primordially pure, it is the primordially infinite and marvelous expanse. This way of being can be described as a recognition of the equalness, nyampa, of appearances and a letting go of grasping or biasing any particular experience over another. It serves as a foundation for various contemplative practices within Dzogchen. To be clear, it's not an effortful rejection. This recognition of equalness or letting go is being beyond dichotomies. In this way, practitioners discard approaches to meditation that promote active engagement by the mind and rest into a receptive openness to all aspects of experience, letting go of effort and exertion. So in this way, letting go sits at the confluence of the view in meditation, dawa and gompa, understanding, and activity, we could say. And it's not a static state of observation so much as a continual preparedness to engage in whatever circumstances might dictate. This includes volitional actions and non-volitional unfoldings. When one relates to both these elements of experience from the stance of letting go, no appearance or experience is privileged in any way. The practitioner rests in a spacious, receptive state of mind. Spacious and effortless learning. So I'd like now to return to transformative learning theory and explore the implications of Longchenpa's presentation of space and effortlessness for how we understand perspective transformation and disorienting dilemmas. Transformative learning theory encourages students to engage in effortful activities to cultivate inner change, to create a shift or transformation. These activities include, as I mentioned, classroom simulations, role plays, so on and so forth, as well as ordinary activities. For instance, a student might attend a political rally that diverges from their political views in service of expanding their perspective. Alternatively, in classroom discussions, students actively explore alternative perspectives on a particular topic in service of expanding their own beliefs. While these processes have demonstrable impacts, as indicated in the research of Mesereau, Patricia Cranton, and others, they're convinced that something needs to change within the student. Based on this, the emphasis is not on what we might understand, based on this, the emphasis is on what we might understand as developmental styles of practices, something that Anne has coined alongside discovery-based practices. And while this conviction is certainly valuable and widely presented throughout Tibetan Buddhism, this idea of developmental, effortful cultivation, this paper emphasizes different ways of engaging, or what we might understand as discovery-based practices. These practices advocate for cultivating a spacious frame of mind and an effortless way of being that's understood as inherently pure, stainless, and uncompounded. These two styles are not mutually exclusive or contradictory in any way. Indeed, they function symbiotically. Within the context of contemporary pedagogy, most, if not all, focus is placed on the developmental approach. And I suggest that complementing it with discovery styles of engagement, we may be able to access transformation in a more expedient or perhaps comprehensive way. At present, we're experimenting with the implications of these types of discovery-based practices in the two projects that I'm involved in, Turgar Schools and the Turgar Institute. It's an image from the Turgar Institute in Nepal. These interconnected educational projects target both child and adult learners. We engage the writings of Longchenpa and many other Buddhist scholar yogis to better understand their writings and to inform as well how we learn and teach. In certain respects, we're flipping some traditional scripts that are often employed in traditional Buddhist environments. For example, as opposed to following the sequence of view, meditation, application, or listening, contemplating, meditating to some gom, we begin with the student's personal experience in meditation or contemplation activities. And this is the first point of engagement. So for example, when we learn about dependent origination, before turning to the text to understand how the 12 links are articulated, we engage our students with contemplative exercises that help facilitate inquiry in the form of discovery-based practices. This allows their own intuitive understanding to emerge. We then return to traditional presentations, the view or the listening components of the practice, and start to consider the content. The impact of this approach can be subtle and may appear insignificant at first, yet it's productive on multiple levels. First, it orients the student's mind into a more open, spacious, receptive space, serving them in their study insofar as they're much more likely to be impacted by the content they later receive. So in other words, they're likely to remain open to new ways of seeing themselves in the world that acknowledge their assumptions, beliefs, and views, but are not limited by them. Secondly, we strive to create inclusive learning environments, something that contemporary pedagogical approaches unanimously value. In our approach, this begins with the practitioner's idiosyncratic ways of being. By remaining open and spacious, they often are able to understand more deeply how they think or learn. This allows them to advocate for their needs, and in turn, as faculty, we can respond more efficiently, tailoring their learning journey. We're finding that this approach results at times in dramatically more endurable understandings of the content, both in the form of retention and the ability to apply the learning into one's everyday life. Two principles core in transformative learning theory. We're also applying these principles in the construction of a new school, Turgar School Yomo, an elementary school in the rural region of Yomo, Nepal. So this kind of zigzag road is the property, just panoramic Himalayan views. And our construction approach in these breathtaking foothills is being designed in a way that's inspired by places like Longchenpa's hermitages in Gangri Tokar of central Tibet and Tarpaling in Bhutan. We anticipate that the spaciousness of this environment will facilitate our students' ability to connect with an open, spacious frame of mind that's more receptive to diverse forms of thought. So theories like transformative learning have taken steps to break free of the oppressive paradigms of traditional pedagogy and open up to a broader range of human experience. They are, however, embedded in ideologies that prevent them from engaging rigorously with the types of receptive, discovery-based practices of systems like Dzogchen. By bringing these two in dialogue, I believe that the legacy of Tibetan Buddhism can serve as a corrective and help pioneer an even more inclusive pedagogy. So I'd like to close with a short autobiographical reflection from a time I spent at Organzong, Longchenpa's hillside hermitage near Shugseb Nunnery and on Gangri Tokar. This happened in 2012. So it reads, when I first reached Organzong, Longchenpa's hillside hermitage situated near the Shugseb Nunnery and Gangri Tokar in central Tibet, something shifts into focus. For many years, I've read Longchenpa's writings on topics such as mind nature, awareness, and fundamental expanse, each of which emphasize qualities of vastness and spaciousness. While informative, the full impact of this has never been clear until this moment. As I peer out from the recently constructed temple commemorating the ancient structure he once occupied, I understand the significance of the spatiality of these terms in a new light. The valley upon which I gaze is incomprehensibly vast. It's expansive and unobstructed. The view is crystal clear. As I sit there gazing out, external reality and internal experience begin to merge. No longer do I feel as if I'm a distinct subject looking out at an external world. The dualism between inner and outer fades. In its place, I feel a novel connection to my surroundings, one that's not based on an object, but instead the space in between. The vastness becomes experiential. So thank you.
All right, we have time for questions, but it looks like this microphone is not on at the moment. So if you could actually step up, that would be really fantastic. I know it's a bit cumbersome, but if you could come up and ask your question in the front, that'd be great. Thank you.
Ooh, in the hot seat. Thank you so much for this. My question is about I would love to hear your thoughts on the pervasive linear relationship between effort and effortlessness in the tradition, right? That kind of that pervasive sense that in order that you have to decrease some of the stains of the mind, you have to arrange your karmic conditions in order for effortlessness to be productive, right, and not misleading. And I guess I would love your thoughts on, like, do you buy that linearity? Like, to what extent? What are the implications of that for kind of pedagogy more broadly? Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think in many instances, I would say I agree with the linearity of it. However, I think the word symbiotic relationship is maybe more accurate, that they develop kind of concurrently and or iteratively. So for example, like these spacious, more discovery-based practices can help kind of incite this level of intuitive wisdom that I referred to here, that then can be cultivated through more deliberate practices, and kind of the elements of that wisdom can be more strengthened in their scaffolding, if you will. The linearity, as in kind of like ethical conduct, gives rise to concentration, gives rise to, and so on and so forth. Within the Dzogchen context, that's not the presentation most often. It's included as an element of the presentation. That's not one that I found to be directly applicable in the classroom. I've had what I would consider not very ethical students get something, but again, maybe this is the kind of symbiotic relationship, that there's kind of iterative steps we take to get there. I have spoken to Mingyur Rinpoche, who's the visionary founder of both of these projects, and he believes that discovery-based practices are really mandatory in a contemporary setting, because we can be so constricted in our understanding of ourselves in the world that just simply resting, and for oftentimes many non-native practitioners, having the first opportunity to look at what's present in their mind is really an important first step. Yeah, thank you.
The microphone is working now, so.
Thank you. You started to approach my question just now, perhaps. I'm curious if you can give us an indication of what an initial exercise is that you give students, so that you then elicit from them something that allows an understanding of where they're at. And as I understand it, that then becomes your platform for moving forward.
It's a great question. And what I've found now is the exercises are very simple, but yet how they arise for the individual is quite diverse. So for example, there's many psychological personality typings we could do, right? Mingyur Rinpoche oftentimes mentions one of body types, speech types, and mind types. This is something that he believes is quite appropriate. And so for a body type, they might feel some sense of intuition. For a speech type, they might actually think in word and apply meaning and kind of discovery through word. And then the mind type is this kind of intuitive understanding that comes forward that's oftentimes difficult to describe. But anyway, so just offering people this space in a semester course to begin with a reflective, just pause periodically throughout a class period. It can be, the dividends are immense. And what's interesting is as you kind of intersperse these moments of pausing and resting into whatever is emerging, right? You could say the natural state, but really for like an undergraduate, it would just be taking a pause and being like, oh, like what's there? Oh, I'm really mad at my partner, right? Because they betrayed me in some way. And then you start to go through the material and it just compounds on each other. So then you look at like the 12 links of dependent origination, and they're going to see that argument that they're having with their partner in a different light. So we also try to, like, for example, we had this beautiful, and I couldn't find any good images of it, this beautiful cooking exercise when we were looking at the aggregates, and we went out and people procured like different ingredients, and we got, as you know, we're in Nepal, so there's beautiful big burners and big pots, and the cooks came and the whole community came, and we cooked a meal together to kind of explore like how are the 5 aggregates arising in that. So creative expression can be really, really useful in that regard as well. But the piece that I'll highlight is this approach really, and it's not intended for mass consumption, right? Like this is intended to be able to curate with a student their learning journey. And so a lot of big institutions, not necessarily Rice, but you can't do it with a 200-person lecture hall, right? It just doesn't function the same way. So that's the only caveat I would add.
All right, we have time for one more question.
Yeah, thank you so much. I loved your presentation. I was particularly kind of honing in on your bookends, talking about your son, and then you mentioned at the Turgar School also working with children, I think, younger students. I've been thinking increasingly about early childhood education.
Me too.
Again, as I kind of mentioned yesterday in a question, because I'm thinking through ecology and ecological awareness, and I think by the time we've reached adulthood or even adolescence, as Schleiermacher says, like you can't teach people to be in intimate relationship with reality, but we can teach it out of people, and that's what we do with our children. So I think we're essentially training them to experience themselves as highly bifurcated from an objectified reality that is alien. So I'm just curious about ways of pedagogical interventions in that, and how you see this applying particularly to early childhood education, getting away from the hyper-developmental model that I think we currently have, and in particular how this receptive mode can be cultivated or engendered in early childhood education.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I haven't thought about Schleiermacher since I was in my theories and methods class, so that's really cool. No, I think you're onto something. So transformative learning theory is presented as an andragogy, so an adult learning theory. And I'm applying it in this case to diverse learners in all ages. And I actually think it's really productive to do so. And I think what you're suggesting is actually kind of evidence in transformative learning theory, that they're waiting to get to it in some later adult life. And I understand Jack Mesereau was a really inspirational guy and just basically saw a bunch of adult learners that needed help. And so he was very pragmatic in his approach. So this isn't a dig at him or his peers. But I think that we can introduce these ideas earlier. You know, awe and wonder has gotten a lot of like focus in certain fields over the last decade. I think this is a great access point for kids. I just took the same 6-year-old to a Celtics game, if you're familiar with American basketball, and someone gifted us front row seats. It was magnificent. And you're in the middle of 20,000 people and everyone's, you know, and he doesn't know the ball from the basket, which didn't matter. Instead, it opened his mind up into like a really open space. So I would consider that a very, very productive learning experience. What you're talking about in developmental styles of education and more traditional forms of education, they don't value that. They see that as other than. And instead, this kind of more regurgitory approach, luckily that's leaving classrooms more often than it's coming in. I think what Mingyur Rinpoche is envisioning, and this comes from a very authentic place of trying to help, looking at Nepali children and kind of the border regions of Tibet and just seeing the amount of anxiety and depression and you know what contemporary Western world or cosmopolitan world has been experiencing for longer. And he's just trying to access that. And I think we're starting to see it, right? Our learners are diverse. So our youngest kids are 6, our oldest kids are 15. The 6-year-olds, they're now 7 or 8. They've been there for a couple of years. You can see what Mingyur Rinpoche likes to refer to as a more fundamental okayness in their experience than you see in like traditional developmental style educational approaches. So that's what I would say. And we make it really fun, of course, because that's what you have to do with kids. And as opposed to like emphasizing like, let's develop more attention span, we don't really need to do it. We need to kind of let their hearts and minds expand and be spacious and open. And in my estimate, that kind of comes forth. We're hoping to do plenty of scientific study on this approach and looking at like, well, what is it? Is it demonstrable? Can we say that a child that's introduced to this intervention, as you put it, at an earlier age actually leads down the road to that? My hypothesis is yes. And in my observation, it seems true.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.